A lot of times, in the industry, first call is a very known thing. We talk about first calls a lot. That's not something that a family knows what you're talking about when you say first call. That's very industry. And so when we use terms like first call or even body or decedent, these are very cold terms, not caring terms at all. So I think when we're talking to families, we want to use language of care intentionally and say, instead of the decedent, when we bring the decedent into our care, if you're saying that to a family, it's like when we bring your loved one, or if you know their name, or however you want to address them, when we bring your father into our care, when we bring, grandma, just use a little bit more care in that language and not be so cold with it. When I talk about the language of care, that's what I mean. It's just like softening up that industry language and make it appropriate for a family. And remember that the family is not from the industry and doesn't always know exactly what you're talking about.
Welcome to the Direct Cremation Podcast with your host, Tyler Yamasaki. Hi, thank you for joining us on the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Yamasaki, CEO of Parting Pro, the #1 cremation commerce platform and case management system. If you like the content, please give us a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment. So today's guest is a repeat guest. She currently oversees the client success division of Parting Pro. What that title means is she is responsible for ensuring that all of our new clients find success, not only with Parting Pro, but in launching and growing their funeral brands. So today, to talk about one of the, if not the most important thing in a successful funeral brand, is the Director of Customer Success at Parting Pro and former General Manager and Licensed Funeral Director at Crown Memorial, a cremation brand that at its peak served over 5,000 families a year. So please help me welcome back to the show, Ashley Jones.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Hi. Yeah, of course. So today's podcast is really going to focus around the first phone call or the first conversation that you have with a family. As we get into a time when, everything is digital, everything is on your phone, people shop around, there's less customer loyalty, all that stuff is happening. Yeah. Can you explain in death care why that first phone call with a family can really set the tone for everything that follows and why that initial conversation is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that initial call is so important because it's really your first opportunity to make an impression on the family about how your business will handle their loved one. Likely they've seen your website. They've probably seen a few competitors' website if they are kind of searching for things on their phone. But that can only really tell you so much about a business, and it can tell you prices and things, but it's not always giving you the feeling of how a business actually handles their day-to-day. So it's really that first impression for a customer to be able to understand who they may be dealing with. And it's also usually, even if a family has done some research or they've talked to a couple funeral homes, it's when it's in the moments of or the hours following a death, it can be very hectic for them, stressful. They're having a lot of things going on at once and trying to make decisions. So they're usually disorganized in thought. So being able to kind of just stabilize them a little bit, give them some peace of mind, let them know that you will be there to help them through this. I think that's the reason that it's so important, is because it's really, besides your website, the first time that they get to understand who you really are.
Yeah. In a situation like this, we're really talking about trust, right? This is such a sensitive procedure or service that you will be performing. So you have to build trust right away.
Absolutely.
What do you think are some of the most important things to help build trust on that first call?
Yeah. I think we have to understand that the customers, the families, questions are mostly going to be about pricing things, right? But behind all of their pricing questions, because that's one of the things that they're comparing, is they really want to know, is this business going to treat my loved one with care? Will I trust my loved one in this business's hands? So that's the underlying question that everybody has, whether they're saying it out loud or not. And I think if we can remember that, then we can just try and make a connection with that family, even though we're going to give them the prices, even though we're going to answer their questions. If we can build in some rapport with them, if we can give them a feeling of trust and warmth over the phone and really focus on that underlying question, even though we're going to give them prices, remember that they're really wanting to know if can they trust me with their loved one. If that's the question you're aiming to help answer, and you can have that in your mind while you're talking about other things, that will come through differently than somebody who's just quoting out prices to somebody. If that makes sense.
Well, how do you balance giving the facts, right? Because I know one of the major questions is going to be, how much does this cost? Right. So how do you balance giving the facts like price and process while still making that genuine human connection?
Right. So, for example, if we were going to say I was going to be taking a price shopper call, for example, and somebody was going to say, what's your price for cremation? I can either immediately say our cremation is $9.95 and just go off into pricing, right? It includes this, this, and this. But what I can do before that is, who am I speaking with? Oh, hi, Tyler. My name is Ashley. What's your loved one's name? Get their loved one's name. Okay, so you said you're looking for cremation prices. Does your family need, not need, or, you would say, has your family had a chance to say goodbye to your loved one yet? Or open up the conversation. So you're actually starting a conversation rather than just prices. So if you can start with building some kind of rapport, and it can be as simple as getting a name, because then you're starting to get some information. You now have their name, they have your name, so they know who they've talked to. You can start making notes about the conversation. You're just starting to build some rapport, like it would be, an acquaintance that you're trying to build a relationship with, and you're trying to know somebody rather than treat it as a transaction. So I think it's really that transactional mindset of, am I just going to have a phone transaction and you want to know the price for this? I'll tell you the price. Okay. Is there anything else? Okay. But when we treat it that way and it's, is there anything else? Instead of leading the conversation with, some questions about, have you been able to say goodbye to your loved one? Will you be planning to have a service? Things like that. You're opening up that conversation to maybe questions that the family had not yet even thought about, and maybe services that they weren't realizing that they were going to need. I think sometimes we go into, especially price shopping conversations, especially in the direct cremation kind of world, because it is kind of known for we do direct cremations. We kind of can have this mindset when talking to price shoppers that all they really want is a price and they know everything else because they've been to our website. But that's not really true. What they know is probably your starting price for your cheapest package. And that might be why they called you, but they may not understand that their only opportunity to have a viewing is going to be at your location before the cremation happens. So we tend to just assume that families know these things when they really don't. Families know that they need to have their loved one taken care of, but they might not understand that they can witness the cremation if that's something that you offer. They might not understand that you actually have somebody on your staff that's a celebrant and could do a really nice memorial for them before or after the cremation. Those are things that they might not be thinking of. So that's really our job, is to kind of uncover their needs, not just spout prices at them.
Mm-hmm. What would you say if you can think of a few takeaways, like what are the takeaways or goals of that first phone call that you have with a family?
Yeah, so I think the very first takeaway is just to build rapport, is to be able to understand what they're needing. And again, one of the things that the family is going to need is prices. So this is never like, don't give them the prices. You're not holding anything out from them, but you can also build in that rapport as you're going. So you're trying to find out who you're talking to. You're trying to find out about the loved one, what kind of services that they will need. And again, this doesn't have to be like a long, drawn out conversation. It can be quick, because a lot of price shoppers, they are quicker conversations, but you want to give them something memorable about you, because you have to think too, if they're calling 2 or 3 or 4 companies, what's going to stand out about you from the others. So for example, this isn't a death care situation, but I recently had to have like my air conditioner serviced, and I don't really know anybody in the town where we're at who does that. So I had asked a friend if she knew anybody. She's a realtor. Um, and so she gave me like 3 names of companies. So I called a couple, and there was a very like drastic difference in the way that they answered their phones, even though they're like an air conditioning company. One was very much like, you called, what do you need? And the other one was like, hey, how's your day going? Oh man, this is a bummer that you've got an AC issue going on. Like, how long has this been going? It was just so much more conversational than just like, what do you need? And this is the price. And there's going to be this fee for us to come out. Okay. The prices could really not even be that much different, but my interaction with one company was much more pleasant and conversational than it was with another. And that's basically what we're talking about. We still want to be conversational, and not be afraid, I think, of the grief almost. Like people that have just experienced a death, and they can be very emotional, rightfully so. And I think sometimes we as funeral directors kind of want to tiptoe around that and not say anything that's going to be upsetting. But we can also just state what's happening, and just acknowledge that, and acknowledge that something has happened. And I think that feels very natural too, because if you ran into somebody in the grocery store and you were just chatting online and they told you that they had just lost somebody, you would have a normal reaction, say, oh, I'm so sorry for that. That must be really tough. Like those are things that sometimes I think in funeral work we can skip over because we just think that they're calling for prices. But those are probably the most important things that we can do, is just build that rapport and offer our regards for what is happening, whether they choose us or not. They've still experienced a death and they're still going through something. So we just need to have that human connection.
Okay. What would you say some of the most common mistakes that you hear, like some of our newest customers make during that first call?
I think a big one is probably just assuming that the family knows what they want. And so when we assume that the family already has made up their mind, or they have talked to a bunch of people, we kind of take ourselves out of the running, if so to speak, from a competition standpoint when we're trying to win business. Assuming that families, again, know exactly what they want. They just want the cheapest option. That I have found to not be true. So, for example, at Crown, we were the low cost leader for a very long time. I mean, we started at $495 for a direct cremation. So very low. And one would think, well, if you're doing cremations at $495, you're probably just serving, a certain population of the community, but that wasn't true at all. We would have people come to us because they liked the price, but not because they didn't want to spend money on other things, for example. We would find that somebody might, only want to spend $495 on a cremation, but they might buy an urn for several $100s because that's of value to them. So I think making the assumption because somebody is choosing a direct cremation, they don't want to spend money, is not true.
So I know one thing that you've mentioned before in the past to me is that you really want to stop from sounding robotic, right? And that you talked a lot about having genuine rapport and building an actual genuine connection with the family or with the person on the phone. What do you think being robotic can do to a situation when a family first calls you?
Yeah, I think it just it's flat. It leaves the call very flat. It's not leaving an impression on that family at all. And it's not doing you any favors to be able to create a customer out of that family. For example, when I started as a funeral director, I had my kind of script just completely memorized, and I could probably still tell it to you to this day. Just very like, it's this, it's like a list of things that includes it. And almost, do you have any other questions? And so it just leaves everything very transactional, and you're not, again, doing even what most of us got into the business for, which was, because we wanted to be able to help families who are experiencing a death. even, stepping out of that robotic mode of like, okay, these are the things I need to make sure that they know. This is our price. These are the things it includes. And just opening up that conversation a little bit and just coming across in a more warm manner and not so transactional will leave a much better first impression than just treating it as like a list of questions that every price shopper has. And it's one more price shopper for the day. One more time, you're going to repeat the same thing for the fourth or fifth time that day, that kind of thing. And I know that's easy to slip into, especially when you're like a high volume and you're maybe talking to multiple price shoppers a day, and most of them are going to have the same questions. But I think it's just, finding that way in with each conversation to make that connection.
Got it. I know that you talked a lot about what you call the language of care.
Yeah.
Could you explain what the language of care is?
Yeah. So I think the language of care is it's softening up the language that we use in our everyday conversations with people and getting away from the industry language. A lot of times, in the industry, first call is a very known thing. We talk about first calls a lot. That's not something that a family knows what you're talking about when you say first call. That's very industry. And so when we use terms like first call or even body or decedent, these are very cold terms, not caring terms at all. So I think when we're talking to families, we want to use language of care intentionally and say, instead of the decedent, when we bring the decedent into our care, if you're saying that to a family, it's like when we bring your loved one, or if you know their name, or however you want to address them, when we bring your father into our care, when we bring, grandma, just use a little bit more care in that language and not be so cold with it. When I talk about the language of care, that's what I mean. It's just like softening up that industry language and make it appropriate for a family. And remember that the family is not from the industry and doesn't always know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it seems like certain words that they use can either scare or comfort them,
Right.
depending on what they use.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the most powerful swaps that you would recommend?
So I hate refrigeration or storage. I hate when that word is used with families just because it's such an unpleasant idea of someone being in refrigeration or storage. So I think care center is a really easy swap for that. Your loved one will be in our care center until cremation. I think just swapping that out. It's still true. They are in your care, in your center. So wherever that care center is, it just makes it sound much softer, very less, it's not jarring like refrigeration or storage would be. I think that creates a mental image, especially for somebody who doesn't know what the back end of a funeral home looks like. That can be a very cold view. Like people, I think, just generally go to what they've seen on TV, with some kind of a morgue situation and drawers or things like that, where it's just very unpleasant looking. So those are like my biggest pet peeves, or like the storage or refrigeration. Let's just not say that. That would be the biggest one.
What else? What are some examples that you have?
So I think removal as well. Instead of, we'll remove your loved one, we're going to come and transfer your loved one into our care as an easy one. Again, like remove is just a harsher word than transfer, even though they mean the same thing. It's just that same thing. Decedent and loved one, again, is one. And then I think too, when we're talking about the loved one, and I mentioned this a little bit, but I think that people in the funeral industry can use the terms that are comfortable with them, for example. So I used to work with a director and, or a few directors actually, and they would call the person in the relationship. So they would say mom, like, what did mom do for a living? And if that's comfortable for you, then I think that is fine. And you should go ahead and use that instead of saying, loved one, even because loved one is still a little bit more removed than making it a little bit more personal, like your brother, your sister, your mother, your, whatever that relationship is. And I just think that feels a little warmer as well than keeping everything very neutral and no names, as if they're just a transaction to be handled versus a person. Yeah.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I want to go back on the idea you talk about running that line between robotic and also answering questions, right? I know people who are not as familiar with being on the phone, or especially those who've never done sales, when someone asks you a question, the immediate gut reaction is to just like tell you the answer, right? So if you ask me, how much does something cost? Like, it almost feels weird not saying, oh, it costs X or costs Y, right?
Yeah.
So how would you say, or what are some of your go-to questions or techniques that you can use to uncover a family's real needs without sounding salesy or pushy?
Sure. Well, I think the first one that comes to mind is to, before you state a price, state what's included in that price. So even if we take the example of, we'll just say cremation is $9.95 just because it's an easy number. But if somebody asks me, what's the cost of your cremation? You say, well, we do offer a direct cremation. This is going to include the transfer of your loved one into our care. This is going to include, us filing the death certificate and the permits for you. This is going to include, and basically list out all of the things that you're going to do before you even get to that price. Because in that, there may be questions that come up. Okay, so you're going to file the death certificate. Okay, actually, how many of those am I going to need? Sure, let me talk about that for you. And what you're doing is you're extending that conversation and understanding the needs before you even get to that price. So if I came out and I said our direct cremation is $9.95, that family stops listening right there because they got the answer that they wanted. They got the price. But if we say it for our cremation, which includes this and this and this and this and this, and I can list 5, 6, or 7 things and then get to the price, they will continue to listen until they hear that price because that's what they ultimately need. So I would say that is one of the biggest things is state your included items and the value that you're giving to the family before you actually tell them the price. Because as soon as that price happens, their answer is done. And then your transfer conversation is also more limited because we're not uncovering any additional needs. You could even say, our direct cremation includes this and this. We can set up a viewing for you if that's something you would need. And then that also opens up that door. Oh, okay, maybe I do want to do a viewing. So I think that would probably be the easiest quick swap for somebody to make is to just state what's included before you state your price.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a way to break through that barrier? Because, I know we've all felt that family that thinks they know what they want. So they come in and say, I want nothing more. I don't want this. I don't want that. I just want the price for your most basic cremation. How do you think you should handle those customers versus ones that might be a little bit more open to, going down the path of the question and answer?
Sure. Yeah. And honestly, if somebody said that to me, if I was talking to somebody today and they said, hey, look, like, I just want the price, just give them the price. Like, that's going to be a percentage of the customers that's going to be like, hey, look, I don't want the discussion. So sure. Yeah. Our most basic package is going to be $9.95. Now you can still leave little like crumbs in there for other things. Right. Like you can say, yeah, absolutely. It's $9.95. We will be able to, offer you any other services that you might need. If you were looking for viewing services, we do have urns and things to choose from, things like that. And there's going to be some of those families where it's just like, just get to the price. Okay, then just give them the price. Like, we don't want to make it an unpleasant experience for the family. And so, of course, this isn't going to work for 100% of your families, right? You're going to have some of those families that are like, just get to it. Then do that. But what you want to do when a family is not like that is really open that door and see where that conversation can lead. And you can still do that kindly and in a warm way by giving the price first, if that's what we need to do. Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. By the way, my name's Ashley. In case you have any questions, our price is $9.95. Please let me know if there's any other things you can help me with, or I can help you with, anything like that. You can still, open that door so it's not just, it's $9.95. Is there anything else? That is still something you can do for sure.
Okay. Well, let's say you've done that. You've not sounded robotic. You've built a rapport. You've had a conversation. You've kind of asked what they wanted,
Mhm.
right? And you've given them a price or maybe a roundabout price of where it would be based on what they've said. How do you go about closing that call? Is there anything that else that you want to get from them or
Mhm.
anything else that you want to tell them
Sure.
before letting them go?
Yeah, I for sure. I think you always want to be able to end the call with like a next step. So even if a family is undecided, if it is a very straightforward phone call, you still want to have like the next expectation. So you want to be able to try and get an email to be able to get them some more information and shoot them over a quick email. That way they've got some more information. And that can be really simple as what's your email address and I'll send you over our site so you've got access to all of our pricing and everything so that you can get that email address out to them. If you can also get a phone number from them, that's best case scenario too, because then that will leave the door open for you to be able to do a follow up with that family the next day, perhaps if they were a price shopper and you wanted to follow through and see did they actually make arrangements overnight, things like that. So I would say, yeah, you want to be able to end with a next step or at least an expectation of what that person can expect from you. Can they expect an email? Can they expect a phone call? If they're going to do, things online, how quick is that for them? What would be the next step that they can expect? You could even, if you could even try and schedule that appointment, even if they're price shopping, say, we'd be happy to have you come in and sit down and go over some information. Of course, that's going to depend on your business setup and if you're doing that, but that is something you do. You basically just want the next step. What is that next step going to be for them?
So what if you don't get a clear next step, right? What if they say, "Hey, I'm going to be shopping around. I'm going to be asking, calling a few other funeral homes
Yeah.
in the area." What do you think your next step should be with that family? Is that it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my next step is if I was able to get an email address from them, my next step would be to send them a proposal email so that they would have the information. They would know who I was. They would have my name. They would have the contact information from the funeral home. And this can be especially powerful for those that are price shopping because they likely are calling multiple people and they are talking to a lot of people and likely like taking notes on some kind of a notepad or something and can get information confused. So this can be presented in a way of to keep things easy for you. Let me just get your email address and let me get you an email so you've got all of this in writing and you've got my contact information so you can reach out and then I can check back with you as well. So I would say the proposal email and the actual proposal email is another opportunity for you to like follow up that first impression because you can have it customized to what you need to say to that family. If you can include anything from your conversation that can actually be an indicator to the family that you were really listening to them and that there was something unique about the conversation. So yeah, I would say for sure that's the next step you want to be able to take. So if you can get an email address and a phone number, that would be the immediate next step is that email. And then I always recommend as well that everybody follows up the next day if you don't see an arrangement come through. So if you've talked to a price shopper today and you come in the next day and there's no arrangement, there's no harm in calling that family back and saying, "Hey, Tyler, this is Ashley at the funeral home. We talked yesterday. Just wondering, was there anything else I can help you with? Did you have any other questions come up overnight that I can answer for you?" And again, it's not a salesy thing. It's more reaching out of like, have you thought of anything else? Any other questions that have come up? How can I help you? What's your kind of next step here? And so you're opening that door again to one, like you remember who they are. Their conversation was important. You're reaching back out. So you're now making an effort because really up until now, they've made all the efforts, right? They've done the searches. They've found your number. They called you. Now you have enough information where you can make an effort as well.
So I can imagine a portion of our listeners who maybe are not comfortable with sales.
Mm-hmm.
would feel like that is bothering the family. Do you think that follow-ups will actually change the decision of a family, or actually, change the outcome of what would have happened if you didn't make that follow-up?
I think for sure they can change the decision of the family because, again, if I put myself in the shoes of a family or really looking for any service, like I can even go back to like my air conditioner example, right? If I had said to people that, I'm just getting some quotes, I need to think about this for a minute or two, and somebody called me back the next day to check in, I feel like I would be more receptive to that and say, okay, they do want my business. They're reaching back out. And I think it's the same in the funeral industry when it's, again, you're in that like stressful time after a death, lots of things going on. I think for those that are uncomfortable with that, right, that we don't even have to look at it as a sale. It's more like, and if that's really uncomfortable for you and it feels really salesy, then take that completely out of your mind and say, okay, I talked to Tyler yesterday. I've understood this about him. We had a brief interaction, but let me give him a call back, see if there's anything else I can help him with based on our conversation yesterday. And leave the sales out of it, because in reality, what you're still trying to do is build that trust with the family. And yes, it might take another couple minutes out of your day, but if you look at this as you're trying to build your reputation as a business, as a provider that is going to be trustworthy, is going to care for the decedents in their care, the families that they serve, that's exactly what you want to be doing. Because what you're doing is, even if that family doesn't choose you and you spent 3 minutes on a phone call checking in with somebody, you're still building up that reputation as a brand that cares in the funeral industry and somebody who will, follow through on what they say. So I think regardless of whether that family chooses you or not, it is worthwhile. And the conversion rate you will see go up if you start to do that second phone call.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes sense. One thing I want to talk about is, I've had a lot of guests on who have grown, from one location to 2 locations to 10 locations sometimes. Yeah. And, the one thing that I find admirable about that is that their funeral homes continue to get and provide 5-star service, right? So they get families who are always happy, that they've chosen that funeral home. How do you think, and even with yourself when you were working at Crown and you had, a bunch of funeral homes underneath you, or funeral directors underneath you, and you had to manage that, how do you create that consistency? Because, part of what you said is that you have to build rapport, you have to be personable, which, can cause a conversation to go in different ways, right? And, we've all seen those businesses where you have one funeral home or you have one funeral director who's really good on the phone and, just somehow just can get more business than, let's say, another funeral director, right? So how do you create that consistency across the staff so that families still get a compassionate experience, but you're still kind of hitting all the points that you need to hit to, be a good business that can answer the phone?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think it's going to begin with the training and helping your staff understand the importance of the phone. And that this is really the way that you get most of your customers is through their interactions on the phone. So I think it's like first setting that, that expectation or understanding for the staff of the importance of that it's not just giving a price. This is, helping our reputation. This is, how we get the business. So I think it really starts with an understanding that your staff understand how important it is. And then from there, we used to use scripts initially when somebody is getting trained, like just a very basic script on like, if somebody's very new to the industry, what you would be able to say. But that needs to transition fairly quickly into more of like bullet points or talking points so that somebody's not reading every single word off of a page, but you might want to have those included items and bullet points quickly on a page for them with a reminder that says, say the package price last, something like that. So they can have something quickly to reference, because there are a lot of phone calls and a lot of things going on in the funeral home. So you can get distracted when you're on a call and things like that. You want to be able to get back on track quickly. So you could even build it out as, make sure and tell them your name, like build in hints almost on some kind of a training sheet, but that's not a word for word script. Because I think what needs to happen, I think the most powerful funeral homes I've seen that do this, or the most, I guess, even powerful people that are on the phones that do this, they are able to make that connection quickly with people. They can do it very naturally, but it's also very genuine to them. They're not being unauthentic to themselves. So they are having their personality there, but it's because they've got an understanding of their role and their importance of it, that they're able to kind of just treat that person on the phone like an acquaintance and answer their questions without being pressured, and without feeling like they have to say every single word perfectly, because it's not about being perfect. It's about making that connection and having that family feel like they'll be able to trust your business.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is a piece of feedback you've gotten from a family that made you think, oh, we did not handle this call correctly? Or do you remember a bad call that you had where you maybe didn't do this and it turned out to be a disaster?
Well, I can remember one situation. So because at Crown we had so many different locations and they didn't all have the same Crown name. So we were connected businesses, but to the consumer, they might not understand. They might not have to make a connection that, okay, those are a sister company. So I had an experience once where I was on the phone talking with a woman who was looking for services, and she was very stressed. She was asking very specific questions, which were a little bit out of, it's not the normal price shopper. So she had very specific questions, which was leading me to understand that she had already had a few of these conversations. There was something that was like driving her questions. And I think I even made arrangements with her. I think she came in actually. Okay, I have to back up. I was not on the phone, but she walked in as a price shopper. So we were having a face-to-face conversation, but she walked in as a price shopper. I think we even sat down and made arrangements. And then when she left, she asked me, I think, where our crematory was. She wanted to know. And she actually took upon it herself to drive by the crematory that evening on her way home. And she saw another business that she had talked to earlier in the day, which happened to be our sister company, located next to the crematory, and figured that they were together. And so she immediately called me back and said, are these related companies? And I explained to her that we were. And she had a conversation kind of go awry with one of my team members. And it just happened to be that there was something that came up in the conversation. It was one of these language of care things. She had very specific questions about how her loved one would be moved, like physically moved. And there was just some things in the conversation said, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something that I remember thinking, if we had used the language of care in that situation, she probably would have gone with the sister company that she talked to first. But it was because we didn't use the language of care, and that sounded so harsh to her that she couldn't get it out of her mind. That she was very upset that we were related companies.
I see.
So it was that kind of a situation where it was like, we were the same company, we're the same crematory, but something that was said to her in regards to the transferring of her loved one and the way that her loved one would be moved. And again, these were very specific questions that are not the normal questions, but that's one thing I can remember, the first one that comes to mind, I guess.
All right. Well, what's a piece of feedback you've gotten from a family that made you think we are superstars on the phone and we actually handled this call the right way?
Yeah. I think the one that I love to hear the most is, you guys made this so simple. This was easy. And it was like, then I felt like we did our job because it should be simple. Like a family should be able to call and find out what they need and get that accomplished fairly quickly without, having to jump through hoops or like pull answers out of us or, you know, find out additional information. We should be able to take care of a family's needs simple and quickly. That's what they're coming to us for. And so that's what I always love to hear was like, this was so easy. Thank you. And that would be like, okay, we did it. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. If someone listening to this, can take one thing away, I think there's a bunch of things, but what do you think is like the number one thing that you should remember when answering the phone? If not any of the specific examples you gave or any of the specific things, like what is one thing that you should tell yourself before you answer the phone that would make probably the biggest difference?
I think before answering the phone, if you could remind yourself that this is new to this family, like treat it like it's the very first time you've had this conversation today. Don't bring your work to the conversation. Let it stand alone. Let this family have the best version of you on the phone that they can. Does it get repetitive? Yes. Did most of us get into the business because we wanted to help families who've experienced a death? Yes. I think just reminding ourselves of that this is actually a way to do that. And in today's world where everything is quick, right? Everybody has access to everything. I think where funeral directors, what I've heard anyways in the last few years is, especially in direct cremation companies, funeral directors no longer feel like funeral directors. They feel like administrative staff.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is paperwork and it is doing this. And not as many people are having services. Not as many people are doing funerals. So that kind of funeral director work, which was once, actually working services and sitting down in arrangement conferences with families for, an hour and a half, that's kind of gone for a lot of direct cremation companies. And so funeral directors don't feel like they're getting out of the business what they thought that they would. I think being able to remind yourself of that and bring that to that phone call is a way that you can get out of the business what you wanted to get out of the business, which was to help families and do that in a caring way that is warm and compassionate and not transactional.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. And I just want to reiterate, that you've helped and Parting Pros helped lots of customers. We've been the software for a lot of funeral homes. And what I mean to say by that is that, we've seen how important that, and I would say like one of the most important things that we've seen that tie the most successful businesses.
Yeah.
Like the one thing that is similar is that the person answering the phone is usually very, very good. Mm-hmm. They all do different things behind the scenes. Right. They all do similar stuff, but there could be a lot of differences behind the scenes. But the companies that do well, that you see do 3, 4, 5,000 cremations, like their first experience on the phone, if you were ever to call them, are amazing.
Agreed.
And I can't stress how important I think that first phone call is, mm-hmm. And how good phone etiquette can go a really long way to really changing the trajectory of your business.
For sure. And it's almost without fail now. So if Parting Pro, if we have a new customer and we're working with them in client success and trying to get them to a successful place, and this will happen with kind of newer customers that they feel like they're not feeling they're getting maybe the traction that they thought they would by now offering online arrangements. It's generally because they're not handling that first call well. It's either that they are not doing a follow through, meaning we're not getting an email address, we're not getting a phone number to be able to, at the very least, contact that family with an email, if not a phone call. But it's generally, that is what it comes down to. And you're right, because even, in my job now, when I call funeral homes to talk to somebody, they're all very different in the way that they answer the phones. And it can be very much like, it can sound very cold even for a funeral home. Even just answering that phone, you're getting an impression of what that funeral home is like. And so it is important. I think that, like you said, it may be the most important thing is the way that the phones are answered. And so I'll tell businesses too, sometimes we'll see this, they've got somebody that is amazing on the phones. And it's like, they need to answer all your phones until we can get everybody else trained on how to do what they do. But you should make that one of their primary responsibilities for now, especially if that's their strength and you are trying to grow your business, then they need to be on the phones. And until everybody else can get to that level, then that should be your primary phone answer until everybody else can get to that level and understand the importance of it.
Awesome. All right. Well, anything else that you can think about that we missed on the first initial phone call?
The only other thing that's kind of coming to mind for me right now is a comparison. So I think an easy comparison that people can make, whether they're in death care or not, is the experience that you would have at like McDonald's versus Chick-fil-A. I think this is an easy thing to translate because everybody is familiar with fast food companies, and one is very much known for the rapport that they try to build. And I don't have to tell you who it is.
Yeah.
And I think that that is a really simple way to look at this of like, when you go to the one who's known for good service, do you feel like you're being like strung along or like asked for information? You're wanting something from them. They're giving it to you, but they're making conversation while they go. And I think that is one of the things to keep in mind is that it doesn't have to be scripted. It can feel very natural, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
I see. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Ashley. This has been helpful. And like I said, the reason that I wanted to have you on and I wanted to talk about this is because of how important I believe this is and how important I've seen the biggest difference in funeral homes. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you. Well, for the Direct Cremation Podcast, I'm Tyler Yamasaki, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.